Welcome back to another episode on Coffee with Craner, and we're back in the new year. The last time we spoke was in December, so I appreciate everyone rejoining for this special show here today with Jodi Butts. Jodi Butts is an incredible person who is a board director, a lawyer, a health system executive, entrepreneur, and many things, and also a host of her own podcast show, Risk. So I want to introduce Jodi today. She graduated from the University of Windsor, for those that are watching from the Windsor-Essex community. She also studied at a variety of other institutions, including Ryerson, Rotman School of Business, University of Toronto, where she completed her law degree. And most recently, she's the chair to World Health Innovation Network. She's also chair of board of directors at the Walrus and a board director for excellent, credible organizations like Canada Goose, Aphria, Dot Health, and also an advisory board member for Bayshore HealthCare. So a lot of leadership skills and positions she has in her leadership gym bag. So I'm glad to have you on the show today, Jodi, and I appreciate your time.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Lyndon.
And every show we kick off with a question relating to coffee. So Jodi, I know you're located in the Ottawa area. Where in Ottawa would you say is your favorite place to get coffee?
I'd say my favorite place is probably the Ministry of Coffee, mostly because it's like the best name for a coffee shop I think you could possibly have in the city of Ottawa. But I mostly drink my coffee at home. I'm not really fit to leave the house before I have coffee.
Yes, and especially now during a pandemic, I guess we're all making coffee at home now.
They're all at home coffees.
Yes. Well, that's great, Jodi. And you're joining us all the way from Ottawa. You have close connections to the Windsor-Essex area. But I want to take this conversation back to when you first started serving as a board director. What was your first position and what was that experience like for you?
So I would say I'm not exactly sure which was chronologically first, but they all kind of happened at about the same time. So one, when I was a young lawyer, I started my own firm with two other lawyers. And through a mutual connection of one of my law partners, some folks reached out to me because they, needed to fill a vacancy for an organization called Cheers, and it was the Community Head Injury Resource Service, and that was because my partner was doing personal injury work, so would see firsthand the consequences of head injuries. They were also had some challenges with respect to their funding and some questions around a building that they had just recently built and how they were going to fund its operating costs. So they invited me to help them sort that out, and that was fantastic. And then shortly thereafter, I joined Mount Sinai Hospital, and I would eventually become their general counsel. And I had the real pleasure and privilege of working with the CEO and in supporting the governance of that organization. And I would say that was a great training ground for really getting to know how governance works and what the levers are that help you create good governance.
So coming in as a young board member, how did you find your ways and fit in with the others that I imagine were much older than you at the time?
Yeah, so I mean, very lucky to have a law degree. I think having the preparation of a law degree gives you some insight into the legal side of governance, and for sure compliance and fiduciary obligations are a big part of that. So I always had that. I tended to be the only lawyer in the room, and so that would at least give me some entry point and some authority from which to speak. But really a lot of listening. Being on a board doesn't mean you have to talk to every agenda item. It doesn't mean that you have to be an authority or say something determinative. And in fact, often the best way you can serve as a board member is by asking questions. So it's okay to not know the answers.
And would you say in those first couple of meetings as a young board member, you were more reserved, or how did you begin to express yourself? Were you nervous? You didn't ask questions for a little while and you sat back and reflected? What was that like?
Well, there's nothing wrong with easing into a role, right? And I would say for sure I eased into the role, but I had a very supportive chair. And I would say it's important to be passionate about the boards you serve on, whether it's their product or their services, and whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. It's important to be passionate about the organization. But much like as a university student, where people will say, yeah, it's really important to be interested in the subject matter of that course, but take the prof, don't take the course. I would equally say it's really important to have respect and kind of understand going in what you hope to learn from your chair, because your chair really has huge influence over the quality of the meeting and what kind of atmosphere and tone that is around the board table. A chair who says there is no stupid questions, that's like very helpful, right? You're probably going to dive in a lot more quickly if you feel like there's that psychological safety there.
And for the Walrus and many other organizations, what would you say your style is as a chair?
I for sure try to encourage as much feedback as possible. I don't see my role as having all the right answers. I see my role as kind of stewarding all the expertise around the table to getting to the right answer. So once again, I think it's a lot of listening to be a good chair. I always say too, there's no such thing as a successful chair and a failing CEO. So it's really important as chair to make sure that the CEO is feeling successful, and you're doing everything you can in your role as chair to tee them up for success when they enter the boardroom.
Very interesting, and it's definitely helpful for those young millennials that are watching and are about to enter some type of board role when they just started in their careers. So I think that's extremely important. Now, making a switch over to your current roles, one of your roles includes being a board director on Canada Goose, and this is a recognizable brand for a lot of people that are watching. What would you say your role consists of as a board director for Canada Goose?
So great question. And, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can answer it. But at the risk of repeating myself, I'll say, number one, your job is to really embrace the company and love the product. And I love Canada Goose. I've been wearing Canada Goose long before I became a board member at Canada Goose. And in fact, my first Canada Goose parka was a men's small because they weren't making women's parkas yet. But I love the outdoors. But being from Windsor, I'm maybe not such a huge fan of the cold. And so Canada Goose represented the solution, or my ability to square that circle in the wintertime. So I do think that's job number one of any board member, is to really get into the product or service or mission of the organization that you're looking to become a part of. I think number two, just really understanding how you can help create value around the table. I think for a company like Canada Goose, they do a lot of things right. There's not you're not trying to help them, fix a compliance problem. You're not helping them to try and fill any obvious gaps. They're a high-performing, world-class organization. So your ability to contribute value is a little bit narrower, but I do my best every day. And I think the third thing is to ask the CEO, how can I help? How can I create value? How can I help you be better? How can I help the organization be more successful? And just a quick comment, there's really three kinds of governance. There's that compliance side, so making sure you follow the rules and regulations that govern your activities. Number two, there's that fiduciary aspect. And I would say that's the first thing every board member should ask themselves: who am I serving when I sit around this table? And it's a different answer for every company, but for a company like Canada Goose, and especially a company that's situated in Canada, yes, first and foremost, it's the shareholders, but you also have to look out for employees to make sure that they have safe working conditions, that they're having opportunities to grow and thrive, and that the organizational development of the organization is strong. And you also have to think about all the stakeholders, people within the supply chain, and all of those companies that rely on Canada Goose's success. And of course, our headquarters are here in Canada. So, you do have to think about your role in society. And I would think today with the pandemic, with recent events down south, and seeing how their politics are playing out right now, I think, it becomes obvious today how important it is to think about the role of the corporation in society today.
Wow, that's definitely helpful. You answered a lot of the questions that I was thinking. But I guess what really made you feel attracted to this brand? What caught your attention with Canada Goose specifically?
Well, I would say first of all, the CEO Danny Rees, he's pretty audacious, right? He is the third generation of his family to lead this company. But he was the one who said, yeah, we're going to conquer the world. And I have a product that I'm going to turn into a public company that serves people around the world and helps keep us warm and keeps the planet cold. And I love that audaciousness. Like, that's pretty awesome, And I'd say the second thing is that, it's a real honor to be a part of a company that has Canada in its name. It just feels amazing as a Canadian. And Lyndon, growing up in Windsor, your pride as a Canadian is a special thing, right? You feel a little bit international because you grew up on the border. A lot of people from other parts of the country think of you as American because they come to our city and they see billboards or they see certain things that strike them as American. But you also tend to be fiercely proud of being Canadian. I loved going to Detroit, but I was always happy to come home.
That's fantastic, and I'm glad that you have that connection, especially with the CEO, and he really caught your attention with his audaciousness. But I want to ask also, what are some skills that you think you've gained throughout your multiple roles as a board director for many organizations?
Yeah, I'm super grateful to all of the chairs and owners of companies that have given me an opportunity to be a part of them, because I do think you pay forward everything you learn from one company to another company. So, even getting my start in healthcare and governance there, just understanding the challenges of data and how to manage quality. And what does, good governance look like when you're involved, you touch so many people's lives. It was a really great training ground. But I would say, really some of the best skill sets I've learned is, one, I think I'm a much better listener than I was when I first got started. I think, in law school, you start to, you kind of get trained into thinking it's about having the right answers, right? Because as a lawyer, someone comes to you, they have a problem. They're not looking to you to opine on things, right? They're looking to you to help them. And that's an important service that lawyers fill every day. But when you sit around a board table, your job is really to listen, to reflect back many times, what you're hearing and trying to understand how it fits into the growth of the company, into maybe the company's challenges and helping them sort that out. I would say the other thing that I've really learned, in addition to just becoming a much better listener, is really the concept of impact. Just really thinking about, for each organization, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, articulating who it is that the company seeks to serve and what does positive impact look like and how do you attempt to measure that. And that's no easy task. And certainly learning that skill hasn't given me any silver bullets, but I do think that I've learned a lot in terms of the kind of process that you go through to reach the right answers on that big question.
And I can imagine some of the decisions you've had to make, and especially being, direct oversight of the entire executive team and those working in the office. You've had to make some tough decisions and think around the entire oversight of the organization.
Yeah, so you get sight lines into all different parts of the company, right? So whether it's IT, so something like, the recent SolarWinds breach that maybe folks read about, you have to reach out to the companies that you support and figure out whether that's a challenge for anyone any organization whose board you sit on. So, you start learning about how IT works and its role within the organization. You do learn a lot about people because you get to know a lot of executives. You get to know your colleagues. I learn from my colleagues every day. And I think, it's always important, whatever stage you're at in your career and whatever roles you end up taking on, it's really good to reflect on, yes, what you're learning, sort of what new skills you're acquiring, but also understanding what you don't know, and it's not necessarily to try and fill those gaps immediately, but to understand that that's not your space, and understanding which one of your colleagues around the table is complementary, that can more lead on those issues. So I think really trying to figure out where you can maybe take a little bit more of a lead on an issue, figuring out how you fit within the broader expertise around the table, and really seeing yourself as a member of a team. I think I went, like, one of my concerns when I stopped, being a CEO and started sitting around a board table, I thought, oh, wow, I'm really going to miss being a member of a team. But you still are a member of a team. You just don't meet every day. So it's a little bit different that way.
And just there, you spoke a little bit about board members filling gaps and bringing a different mindset to each board, and the selection process, like we talked about a bit earlier. Each person is different, and they're diverse, and they bring a totally different mindset. What would you say the expertise that you bring to the boards that you sit on?
Okay. Well, I think for one, as a lawyer, just, bringing that sort of compliance mindset. Something when I was at Mount Sinai Hospital, we went through this whole exercise of where we listed every statute and regulation that applies to the activities of the hospital and its research institute. And that was it was a huge undertaking, for sure. But it also kind of taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about how to speak to people about risk, and how to not just create a sense of anxiety, but actually look at your risks of an organization, and how to put them in a format where it's actionable, and where it increases your understanding of the company, and that you actually make it stronger.
So you really bring that legal and compliance and risk adverse mindset to the organizations you're a part of.
I do my best.
That's fantastic. And I want to talk a little bit about board efficiency and making sure that they're effective. And I imagine that you've sat in multiple meetings that were way longer than they needed to be. What do you believe is key in making those meetings effective and efficient?
Well, I think the first thing sits in the hands of the board members, which is read your package. And nobody wants to hear that. It's so boring and it's so trite. It's like saying, show up to class having done the readings. But it's true. The more that each member of the board reviews the package thoroughly, the more discussion you can have, and less presenting, right? So less having management present to you. You can actually talk about the material, kick the tires on ideas, and really try and do a full 360 around whatever issue that is coming forward. So I would say that's really important, and like I say, a little trite, but very important.
Definitely is. And for those watching, let's say it's a young millennial or someone in the workforce that has been in the workforce for a while. They recently got hired on as a board. What are some best practices you could share with those people, Jodi?
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, you will want to sit down and have a conversation with the chair, and have a conversation with the CEO, and just try and figure out what are the challenges of that particular organization, and where are they trying to go, and try and determine why they're interested in having you around the board. Like what role do they envision you playing? And it may be that you see your role as that plus some other things. You may just choose to solely focus on that. But I think it's just really important to kind of understand where the chair and the CEO see what kind of role they see you playing. The second part is just really understanding, the context of what you're operating in, what principles apply. So I'll use the example of the walrus. The walrus is a member of the Trust Project. Well, it's really important to understand what the principles of the Trust Project are and how those items impact you as a board member, how it influences your role and your contributions. In the not-for-profit context, really understanding that mission, vision, and values, so that you're not just going through an agenda, right? I think we've all found ourselves in those situations where you're at a meeting and, you can sometimes think of your job as getting through the agenda. Or when I was a university student, I used to joke, it's like, how many pages does this essay need to be? Oh, it needs to be 35 pages? Okay, well, my thesis is this essay will be 35 pages long. No, that cannot be your thesis. You're not going to get a good mark if that's your thesis. So, knowing what it is you're there to achieve so that you don't lose sight of that larger impact, I would say is really important too. And just, reading those minutes, reviewing those board packages, and really focusing as much as you can that your comments around the board table are in the form of questions. Your role as a board member isn't to know more than management. It's not to tell them what to do. You're not their boss. But to frame as much as you can your comments as questions so that you probe and that you really seek to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the business as best you can.
Wow, we've covered a lot tonight, and I think you mentioned some really great points of knowing your team, making sure that you understand the role that you play in the organization, understanding the organization itself. You talked about coming prepared to meetings, reading the packages. That's probably reiterated many times throughout boards. So I truly appreciate your insights today, Jodi. And I think that for myself, being a young student sitting on a few boards, and those that are watching, I think they really gained a lot from our conversation. But before we wrap up, I'll steal you for another minute here. We do have a question that popped up in the comments. It's from Cameron Stalbrand. He says, could you talk a little bit about disagreeing with fellow board members? How do you deal with that?
That's a great question because it does happen, and, hopefully everyone around that board table is passionate about what you do. But that doesn't necessarily mean you agree on the best ways of going about it. So I would say, first of all, and once again, forgive me if I sound a little trite, but we used to have this saying in law school when we would talk about trial advocacy, and your job there was to cross-examine, not examine crossly, i.e., your job there is to ask questions. It's not to be angry while you're asking the questions. And I would say that's the same thing. Like, always with full respect of fellow board members, just doing your best to, ask questions, to challenge assumptions, but not the person, and to really kind of understand where that person is coming from. Reasonable people can disagree, and really, at some point in your career at a board, there should be some significant disagreement, right? Otherwise, you're probably falling a little bit of a victim to groupthink. There should be some disagreement, and it may be a sign. I'll just digress for one quick second. There's this really great book called Meltdown, and if you read that book, it looks at the architecture of disasters and the way disasters are set up. They most naturally occur in settings where there isn't a lot of friction. So this book, among many other excellent arguments, makes the argument that having diversity and diversity of opinion and perspective is super important to prevent meltdowns, because it's that disagreement that creates friction. Otherwise, you can very quickly kind of go down a path that might, end up representing an existential risk to the organization.
That's a great point. I can imagine it can be difficult when you're so passionate about what you're speaking about, right? And knowing when to draw the line.
Yeah. I would say one last tip: don't back channel. Try to keep all the conversation in the room. I think boards run into a lot of problems when people try and politic outside of the room. Really, you should try and keep all the conversation in the room, disagree in front of each other, explore all the options, and then ultimately it tends to be up to the majority of the board to decide the best way forward. And once that decision is taken, you agree with that decision.
Yes. Well, Jodi, we covered a lot of ground tonight, and I know we went over a bit in time, but I do appreciate you joining us, and especially the folks watching out in Windsor-Essex. We appreciate your time and definitely appreciate all the knowledge you provided us. So thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Thank you for volunteering, Lyndon. It's really important to be a part of boards, and I just encourage all young people to really get involved in boards, because the sooner you get started, the more rich career you're going to have. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jodi. We'll see you next time on the Coffee with Crainer show.